Have you ever had a conversation with someone who feels like they have multiple personalities, each with their own opinion, energy, and mood? 1 minute, they're on your side. And the next, they're challenging everything you believe. Sound familiar? If you've ever chatted with a Gemini, you probably know exactly what I mean. Talking to a Gemini is like arguing with 3 different people at once. But with just one person in front of you. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can this be? How does one person manage to hold so many sides to themselves? Well, Gemini is not your typical sign. In fact, they're ruled by the planet of communication, Mercury, so it's no surprise they can talk circles around anyone. But trust me, there's more to it than just being chatty or unpredictable. There's a deep psychology behind their complexity, and once you understand it, it will completely change the way you view your conversations with them. Welcome to Zen Mind Peaceful Life. If you're someone who's intrigued by astrology or you've ever found yourself lost in the whirlwind of a Gemini's ever-changing thoughts, then you're in the right place. In today's video, we're going to explore why Geminis seem like they have multiple personalities and how this can impact your relationships with them, whether they're friends, family, or even romantic partners. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand Gemini's fascinating mind but also gain practical tips on how to connect with them and navigate these dynamic conversations. So, take a deep breath, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into the wonderful complexity of Gemini. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Talking to a Gemini feels like arguing with 3 people at once. Have you ever sat down for a conversation with someone, and the entire time, it feels like you're debating not just one person, but a whole team of different voices and opinions? If you've ever talked to a Gemini, you know exactly what I mean. 1 minute, they're agreeing with you, the next, they're on the complete opposite side of the argument, and by the time you're trying to keep up, they're already off to a new topic. It's like having 3 different people with 3 different perspectives, all wrapped into one. And while it may feel overwhelming, it's this very quality that makes them fascinating, complex, and, dare I say, a little bit unpredictable. But if you've ever wondered why Gemini can make you feel like you're having multiple conversations at once, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into the essence of the Gemini personality to uncover why their duality feels like having a conversation with not 1, but 3 people at once. Let's explore what's happening under the surface, and I promise, by the end of this video, you'll not only understand Gemini better but also get some practical advice on how to navigate these whirlwind conversations in your own life. Let's begin with one of the most obvious reasons why Gemini is so unique, their dual nature. You see, Gemini is symbolized by the twins, representing the duality within every person born under this sign. But what does that really mean in a practical sense? For Geminis, it means their personality isn't one-dimensional. They can switch gears in an instant. And this isn't just about mood swings, this is a fundamental part of how they experience the world. For example, you might be deep in a conversation about a shared interest, like music, and suddenly, they'll switch topics to politics, passionately defending a viewpoint you didn't expect. Just as quickly, they may jump to a completely unrelated topic, like their thoughts on an upcoming trip or even an off-the-cuff remark about a book they're reading. It's not that they're trying to confuse you or play devil's advocate, they're simply processing multiple ideas at once. This is how their mind works. A conversation with a Gemini is more like an intellectual puzzle, constantly shifting and changing. It can feel like you're trying to keep up with 3 people who are constantly shifting perspectives. But in reality, it's just one Gemini mind that's always on the move. Understanding this duality is crucial to having a peaceful, enjoyable conversation with a Gemini. It's not about feeling frustrated or overwhelmed by their shifting thoughts, it's about embracing the flow. If you're talking to a Gemini and they suddenly change topics, don't try to force them to stay on track. Instead, lean into the shift. Ask them questions about their new topic of interest. And you'll find that the conversation becomes much more engaging and even fun. And if you're someone who's prone to overthinking, you'll probably start to appreciate the mental freedom that a Gemini brings to the table. Allowing the conversation to naturally evolve will make it a lot less stressful for both of you. But here's the thing, this duality doesn't just show up in their topics or interests, it's also reflected in how they communicate. The most fascinating part of being around a Gemini is their ability to embody multiple personalities in one body. One moment, they may be calm, contemplative, and philosophical. The next, they'll be energetic, animated, and quick-witted. Sometimes, they're even sarcastic or playful, and if you're not careful, you might miss their true feelings beneath all the humor. It's like one moment you're chatting with someone deep and reflective, and the next, you're face-to-face with a completely different person, full of energy and enthusiasm. It can be tricky to pin down exactly how a Gemini feels or thinks, because they might not even know it themselves. Their emotions are often in flux, and they might switch from one state to another before they even fully process their feelings. But that's okay. It's just how they operate. For people close to Geminis, learning to navigate their shifting moods and personalities is part of what makes being in a relationship with them so enriching. If you find yourself struggling to keep up with the changes, try taking a step back and letting them lead the conversation. Don't worry about staying in control or figuring out where they're headed next. Instead, sit back and enjoy the ride. They're probably just as fascinated by the twists and turns as you are. Another key aspect of why talking to a Gemini feels like dealing with multiple people is their need for mental stimulation. Geminis are ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication and intellect. This makes them incredibly sharp and quick-witted, but also, it creates a constant craving for new ideas, new experiences, and new conversations. If you're talking to a Gemini and the conversation starts to lag, don't be surprised if they suddenly shift gears and bring up something unexpected, just to keep things exciting. They need mental variety, constantly shifting between subjects, exploring new perspectives, and trying to keep the conversation dynamic. Think about it this way. Imagine you're having a conversation with a Gemini about travel plans. And before long, they've turned the discussion into a debate about the best books to read while traveling. Now, you're discussing literature, culture, and maybe even philosophy, all in the span of 10 minutes. It's not that they're trying to avoid your original topic, they're just not satisfied with staying on one track. For them, exploring different topics is a way of keeping their minds sharp and engaged. They thrive on new information, and they enjoy being able to bounce between various subjects in order to keep the conversation lively. This trait of constantly needing stimulation is something you can use to your advantage when talking to a Gemini. Instead of sticking rigidly to one topic, consider playing along with their ment. Now, it's not all just about this constant self-questioning. If you're someone who tends to, so, what does all of this mean, FO? And remember, just as. But what happens when a Gemini's personality feels too overwhelming? What do you do when their constant shifts start to leave you feeling exhausted? Stay tuned, because I'll be sharing some tips on how to balance out the energy and protect your peace while engaging with these dynamic personalities. If you've ever had a conversation with a Gemini, you know it's like riding a wave that never quite crashes. It's thrilling, unpredictable, and just when you think you've got the rhythm, the wave shifts again. That's the essence of a Gemini. They are constantly moving, constantly shifting, and if you're not paying attention, you might feel like you're arguing with a completely different person every few minutes. But what if I told you this shifting nature was actually a sign of their intellectual brilliance and emotional complexity? What if these constant changes weren't signs of chaos, but rather reflections of how deeply they experience and process the world around them? It might seem confusing at first. Talking to a Gemini can feel like you're on a mental roller coaster. But once you understand why they operate the way they do, everything starts to click. Geminis are ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, which makes them some of the most versatile thinkers of the zodiac. This constant flux and shifting of ideas is actually a reflection of their mental agility. It's not that they can't make up their minds, it's that they're constantly rethinking their ideas, processing new information, and considering multiple perspectives all at once. Let's talk about the need for mental stimulation. You see, Geminis are intellectually restless. They don't like to linger too long on a single thought, which is why conversations with them often feel like a whirlwind of shifting topics. For them, it's not about staying on one track, it's about jumping from one idea to the next, because that's how their mind works. So if you're having a conversation with a Gemini and they suddenly veer off into a new subject, it's not necessarily a sign of disinterest. In fact, it's the opposite. They're mentally engaged in trying to find something that excites their mind. For example, imagine you're discussing an exciting new project at work, and out of nowhere, they start talking about a book they just read or a hobby they've recently picked up. It can catch you off guard, but instead of getting frustrated, try to embrace the shift. Ask them questions about the new topic they've brought up, and you'll quickly realize that they just can't help themselves. They need new mental stimulation to keep their mind sharp. By engaging with them in this way, you'll find that the conversation becomes much more enriching. You won't just be going in circles, you'll be learning something new about their world, and maybe even about your own. But here's where it gets interesting. Gemini's need for mental stimulation is tied to a deeper need for variety in their lives. It's not just about having different conversations, it's about experiencing life in all of its facets. When a Gemini meets someone with similar intellectual curiosity, that connection can be electric. But if you're someone who enjoys more stable, predictable conversations, you might find yourself struggling to keep up. The key here is to let go of the need for consistency and embrace the fluid nature of the relationship. When you're with a Gemini, it's about adapting to their ever-changing perspectives and letting your mind wander with them. This need for variety doesn't just come out in their conversations, it shows up in their actions as well. A Gemini will rarely be content with the status quo. They're constantly seeking new experiences, new opportunities, and new ways to grow. If you're close to a Gemini, this might mean that they're always on the lookout for something exciting, whether it's a new hobby, a new place to visit, or a new career path. And while that can be incredibly exciting, it can also be exhausting if you're not used to their pace. But the best thing you can do is embrace the adventure. If you want to connect with a Gemini on a deeper level, be ready to take that leap with them. Try out new things together, explore new hobbies, or simply stay open to the unexpected. Now, let's dive deeper into the psychological side of the Gemini mind. One of the reasons they shift so quickly between different personalities, ideas, and moods is because they are constantly seeking self-discovery. For a Gemini, life is an exploration. They don't always know who they are, and that's okay with them. They're not afraid of change, and they don't feel the need to settle into one identity. This is why they might seem inconsistent at times. They're exploring multiple versions of themselves. Think about it this way: a Gemini might wake up one day feeling like they want to focus on their career, and by the next week, they're consumed with a new passion project or interest. This can be frustrating for those around them, especially if they seem to flit from one goal to the next. But it's essential to recognize that this isn't indecisiveness, it's their way of navigating life. They want to experience everything, try everything, and learn from everything. This constant exploration of self can be both exciting and challenging. If you're in a close relationship with a Gemini, whether it's romantic, familial, or friendly, understanding that they're always evolving can help you appreciate them for who they are in the moment. They might change their minds, their opinions, or even their goals, but that's part of their journey. It's not about them being fickle, it's about them growing and learning along the way. When you find yourself in one of those conversations where it seems like they've flipped on their stance completely, don't take it personally. Instead, appreciate that they're reflecting, evolving, and growing. If you want to keep the connection strong, try to be supportive of their exploration. Let them know it's okay to change their mind and that you value the process of growth they're going through. If you're someone who finds comfort and stability in certainty, This might feel a bit unsettling at first. But here's the thing, Geminis offer a unique opportunity for growth. They force you to stay flexible, to think on your feet, and to embrace the unknown. They teach you that life isn't about static decisions, it's about continuous learning. So, if you can match their energy and go with the flow, you'll not only have a deeper connection with them, but you'll also grow alongside them. But there's a downside to all this mental stimulation and emotional flux. Geminis can sometimes get lost in their own thoughts, jumping from one idea to another without fully completing a conversation. This can leave those around them feeling frustrated or disconnected. If you've ever had a conversation with a Gemini and felt like you never really finished a thought or got closure, you're not alone. Their minds work so quickly that they often don't give enough time for any one idea to fully develop before moving on to the next. If you find yourself in one of these conversations, here's where the advice comes in. When talking with a Gemini, be clear about your need for closure. If a conversation feels like it's been left hanging or you didn't get a chance to fully express your thoughts, politely bring it back around. Ask them to slow down and revisit a point. Geminis appreciate someone who can keep up with their mental speed, but they also respect people who can anchor them in the present moment. By gently guiding the conversation back to the original topic, you can ensure that both of you feel heard and understood. Another key to navigating Gemini conversations is to appreciate their humor and sarcasm. Geminis are natural comedians, and their sharp wit is a signature part of their personality. But sometimes, it can be hard to tell whether they're being serious or playful. They might throw in a sarcastic comment or make a joke. And if you're not paying close attention, you might miss the nuance. Here's the tip, don't take everything at face value. If a Gemini makes a joke or sarcastic remark, it's probably a reflection of their lighthearted nature, not a challenge to your opinion. Take their humor in stride, and you'll find that conversations with them become a lot more enjoyable. Finally, it's essential to understand that Geminis are incredibly social creatures. They need interaction, connection, and a constant exchange of ideas. If you're close to a Gemini, don't be surprised if they call you out of the blue, just to chat or share something they've been thinking about. It's not about being needy, it's about their need for intellectual and emotional connection. They thrive on variety, and they crave deep conversations that can stimulate their mind and keep them engaged. So, when you're in a conversation with a Gemini, remember to stay flexible. Let them lead the conversation, but also guide it when needed. Appreciate their intellectual curiosity. And don't be afraid to challenge their ideas or bring in your own perspectives. And most importantly, be patient with their ever-changing moods and thoughts. If you can adapt to their flow, you'll find that talking to a Gemini is an exciting, enriching experience that constantly keeps you on your toes. As you continue your journey with a Gemini, embrace their fluidity. It's part of their charm, and it's what makes them so intriguing. When you understand and accept their complexities, you'll realize that the whirlwind of thoughts and opinions isn't something to survive, it's something to be embraced. And who knows? You might even find yourself thinking a little more like a Gemini, open to new perspectives, new ideas, and new possibilities. Have you ever sat down to talk with someone, only to find that, within a few minutes, it feels like you're having an argument with not one person, but 3 different versions of them? One moment, they agree with your point of view. The next, they're on the complete opposite side, and before you know it, the conversation has shifted in a whole new direction. If you've ever experienced this with a Gemini, then you're not alone. Talking to a Gemini can often feel like you're juggling multiple conversations all at once, and the truth is, there's a reason for that. Geminis, ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, are known for their intellectual agility and their restless, ever-curious minds. They thrive on new ideas, fresh perspectives, and mental stimulation, which means that every conversation with them is an adventure, a journey through a labyrinth of thoughts, ideas, and emotions. But that very restlessness that makes them so fascinating can also make their conversations feel overwhelming at times. You can find yourself swept up in their ever-changing energy, trying to keep up with the rapid-fire shifts in topics, emotions, and perspectives. At the core of it, talking to a Gemini is like trying to hold a conversation with someone who is constantly evolving. Their minds work quickly, and they can process multiple ideas simultaneously. They might start off discussing a book they're reading, then suddenly veer into a deep conversation about philosophy, only to then jump to a lighthearted topic like an upcoming weekend trip. To the untrained ear, it may seem like they're all over the place, but in reality, it's simply how their minds work. This mental agility is a big part of what makes them so intriguing. Geminis are naturally curious, constantly seeking to understand the world from different angles. They don't just want to have one conversation. They want to have many at once. So when you're talking to them, it's essential to embrace the flow. Don't feel pressured to stay on one topic or keep the conversation linear. Instead, let the conversation evolve naturally, following the threads of their thoughts wherever they lead. Be curious and ask them to dive deeper into whatever they're passionate about at the moment. The more open you are to their shifting perspectives, the more enriching the conversation will become. But as much as Geminis love to explore new ideas, they also crave mental stimulation that challenges them. If you're the type of person who enjoys a steady, predictable conversation, you might find yourself struggling to keep up with a Gemini's quick changes. They want to learn and grow in every interaction, which is why their conversations can feel like an endless cycle of discovery. It's not that they're uninterested in your point of view, it's that they are always looking for the next intellectual challenge. So, if you find yourself getting frustrated or overwhelmed, take a moment to remember that their shifting focus is actually a reflection of their deep desire to engage with the world on a deeper level. When they jump from one topic to the next, it's not because they're bored, it's because they're mentally energized and eager to keep the conversation flowing. Instead of trying to force them to stay on one track, embrace their curiosity and encourage them to share more. The key is to match their energy without feeling the need to control the direction of the conversation. As you navigate these conversations, it's important to remember that Geminis aren't just trying to confuse you, they're sharing their world with you in the only way they know how, through constant exploration. They're testing ideas, playing with perspectives, and seeking deeper understanding. They need people in their lives who are just as open to change and new ideas as they are. So, the next time you find yourself talking to a Gemini, try to embrace their shifting focus. Instead of feeling like you're losing control, let go of the need to steer the conversation in one direction. Instead, enjoy the ride and let the conversation unfold naturally. But while their need for mental stimulation can make for thrilling conversations, it's also what drives their ever-changing moods and emotional states. Geminis are known for their fluid emotional nature, which often reflects the shifting dynamics of their thoughts. One moment, they might be enthusiastic and full of energy, and the next, they might be pensive or distant. It's this emotional variability that can make them seem unpredictable. But, much like their mental flexibility, their emotional nature is a result of their constant exploration of the self. For those close to a Gemini, understanding this emotional fluidity is crucial. It's not that they're being moody or unpredictable on purpose, it's just part of their personality. They feel deeply, but their emotions often move quickly, changing as rapidly as their thoughts. This can be difficult for people who prefer stability and predictability, but it's essential to recognize that this emotional flux is part of what makes them who they are. So, if you're in a close relationship with a Gemini, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, it's important to approach their emotional shifts with understanding. Instead of taking their mood changes personally, try to see them as part of their personal growth process. Geminis are always trying to understand themselves better, and their emotions are just one of the many things they're constantly reevaluating. This is where your patience and emotional flexibility come into play. If a Gemini seems distant one moment, don't take it as a sign that they've lost interest. Instead, recognize that they might be working through something internally, and give them the space to do so. When they're ready, they'll come back to the conversation with a fresh perspective. Another key element in understanding a Gemini's emotional landscape is recognizing that they often experience emotions more intensely than they may let on. While they may seem like they're constantly switching from one emotion to another, underneath it all, they may be processing a lot more than they express. They might joke about something that's actually bothering them or act aloof when they're feeling vulnerable. As someone close to a Gemini, it's important to be attuned to these subtle emotional shifts. Don't dismiss their moods or brush them off. Take the time to understand the deeper feelings behind their actions. By showing genuine interest in their emotional world, you'll help them feel heard and validated. And when a Gemini does open up, be prepared for them to express themselves in a way that might surprise you. Their communication style is often layered and complex, and they may not always express their emotions in a straightforward manner. Instead of expecting them to lay everything out on the table, try to listen between the lines. Pay attention to what they're saying and, just as importantly, to what they're not saying. They often communicate through humor or indirect comments. So understanding their emotional world requires a level of attentiveness and empathy. It's also important to remember that Geminis are not afraid of change. In fact, they embrace it. If they feel that something in their life isn't working for them, they'll often make a swift change to find a better path. This can be both exciting and unsettling for those around them. But it's just another part of their personality. They thrive on transformation, and they believe that the only way to grow is through constant evolution. Whether it's a new job, a new hobby, or a new relationship, Geminis are always looking for ways to reinvent themselves. This drive for self-improvement can sometimes make them seem flighty or inconsistent. But in reality, it's a reflection of their need for progress. They're constantly seeking new experiences, new perspectives, and new challenges. If you're in a relationship with a Gemini, be ready to go on that journey with them. Embrace the changes they want to make, and support them in their quest for personal growth. The more flexible and open-minded you are, the stronger your connection will become. At the same time, this desire for constant change means that Geminis can sometimes feel like they're hard to pin down. Their interests, goals, and even their emotional states are always in flux, which can make it difficult to predict their next move. But rather than feeling frustrated by their unpredictability, try to see it as a gift. Geminis offer a fresh perspective on life, and their willingness to embrace change can inspire you to do the same. If you're willing to take the ride with them, you might just find yourself growing in ways you never expected. One of the most important things to keep in mind when interacting with a Gemini is that they are naturally social beings. They thrive on connection, communication, and new experiences. If you find yourself feeling disconnected from a Gemini, it's often because they've become too caught up in their own thoughts or they haven't had the kind of mental stimulation they crave. The solution? Engage them in conversation, challenge their ideas, and give them the space to explore new thoughts. Geminis need people who can keep up with them and share in their intellectual adventures. When you're able to match their energy and curiosity, you'll find that your conversations become more fulfilling and meaningful. But what do you do when you're feeling emotionally drained by a Gemini's constant shifts? How do you protect your own energy while still engaging with their dynamic personalities? Stay tuned, because I'll be sharing some tips on how to maintain balance when navigating the whirlwind of a Gemini's ever-changing world. If you've ever had a conversation with a Gemini, chances are you've experienced that sensation of being pulled in several different directions at once. You think you're deep in one topic when, suddenly, they switch the subject entirely, and you find yourself having a whole new conversation with someone who seems like a completely different person. At first, it can be overwhelming, confusing, and even a little exhausting. But once you understand the psychology behind a Gemini's shifting moods and ideas, everything starts to make sense. In fact, it's not only fascinating, but there's also a lot you can learn about yourself along the way. The real beauty of a conversation with a Gemini lies in their versatility. This flexibility isn't just an accidental trait, it's the core of their being. As a mutable air sign ruled by Mercury, the planet of communication, they possess the gift of mental agility. Able to process and communicate multiple ideas at once. But this is exactly what makes a conversation with them feel like you're arguing with three different people. Their ever-evolving thoughts and opinions often seem to come from multiple angles. And if you're not used to the whirlwind of shifting perspectives, you might find it difficult to keep up. At the heart of it all, however, is Gemini's need for variety and stimulation. Their intellect thrives on change, and their conversations are just a reflection of their ever-expanding view of the world. You'll quickly find that each new topic, each sudden shift in mood or opinion, isn't a sign of inconsistency, it's simply a way for them to challenge themselves and, in turn, those around them. Mental agility, the ever-evolving thoughts of a Gemini. When you engage with a Gemini, you quickly realize that no subject is too small or too mundane. They can take something as simple as a weather forecast and turn it into an elaborate discussion about climate change, followed by an analysis of what weather patterns tell us about human behavior. Geminis are natural conversationalists, but their minds don't work like most other signs. They constantly need fresh input, something new to chew on. This means that when they start talking to you, you're not just getting one perspective, you're getting multiple angles of analysis and understanding, all rolled into one conversation. Take, for instance, a conversation about a book they're reading. They might begin by telling you about the plot, but before you know it, they've shifted gears and are discussing the philosophical implications of the story, before jumping to a tangent about the author's background or the history behind the genre. As the conversation continues, they might shift yet again, focusing on how the book's themes relate to current world events. If you're not mentally prepared for the rapid fire of topics, it might feel like you're on a roller coaster of ideas. But don't fret, this is where their brilliance lies. Geminis want to explore everything from different perspectives and points of view, because their mind constantly craves new input. This mental stimulation doesn't come with any set plan or structure. It's like trying to hold on to a kite that's constantly fluttering and shifting in the wind. The key to navigating this kind of conversation is to match their intellectual energy. When a Gemini brings up something unexpected, rather than trying to rein them back in, go with the flow. Allow yourself to explore their new ideas, ask questions, and don't be afraid to jump from topic to topic with them. This free-flowing, open approach will make the conversation feel more enriching and less like a chaotic mess. And here's the thing. If you're the type of person who enjoys a more structured conversation, you might initially find this style of talking frustrating. But instead of trying to direct the conversation back on track, embrace the unpredictability. You might be surprised by how engaging and stimulating it can be to allow the Gemini to guide the flow. Let them share their thoughts and challenge your perspectives. It might take a little getting used to, but soon enough, you'll start to appreciate the fluid, dynamic nature of their conversations. Emotional fluidity, understanding the emotional shifts. One of the things that makes Gemini conversations feel like you're interacting with multiple people at once is the emotional fluidity they embody. As mutable air signs, Geminis are not known for being emotionally constant. One minute, they're upbeat, playful, and full of energy, and the next, they're deep in thought, quiet, or even distant. This shifting emotional state can be disorienting, especially if you're used to more predictable emotional responses from others. But what can seem like emotional inconsistency is actually a reflection of their inner workings. Geminis experience their emotions with a unique kind of intensity, but that intensity is often fleeting. They feel deeply, but their emotions don't tend to stay in one place for long. This can be tricky for people who are more emotionally grounded or consistent, as a Gemini's emotional state can change in the blink of an eye. One moment, they might be passionately defending an idea, and the next, they're asking you a lighthearted question as if nothing ever happened. Understanding this emotional fluidity is key to having a successful and fulfilling conversation with a Gemini. It's not that they're being flaky or inconsistent, it's just part of their nature. Their emotions are always evolving, just like their thoughts. Instead of trying to stabilize their emotions or get them to stay in one mood for too long, learn to flow with them. If they seem distant or quiet, don't take it personally. It could just be that they're processing something internally, or they've shifted to a new mental focus. If you're close to a Gemini, the best advice is to give them space when they need it. Recognize that they're constantly moving through different emotional states and that each shift is part of their personal growth. When they come back to you, they'll often have a new perspective or fresh insight to share. Be patient with their emotional shifts, and instead of reacting to them, allow them to unfold naturally. You'll create a deeper connection with them if you don't try to pin them down emotionally but instead respect their need for emotional variety. For example, if a Gemini seems distant, resist the urge to push them for answers or to try and fix whatever's on their mind. Instead, let them work through their emotions at their own pace. When they're ready to share, they will. In the meantime, maintain a calm and steady presence, which will help them feel safe to come back and engage with you on their terms. The need for constant change, adapting to their ever-evolving world. Geminis are known for their restless nature, not just mentally, but emotionally and physically as well. If you've ever been around a Gemini for an extended period of time, you've probably noticed that they rarely stay in one place. Whether it's their thoughts, their goals, or their physical surroundings, they're always seeking change, growth, and new experiences, which is why they can sometimes seem unpredictable. This need for constant change is a natural part of who they are. Geminis crave variety in every aspect of their lives. They get bored quickly if things remain static for too long. And they're constantly in search of new challenges, new hobbies, and new experiences to keep them engaged. Whether it's starting a new project, picking up a new hobby, or even switching careers, Geminis love change because it keeps their minds and spirits fresh. If you're in a close relationship with a Gemini, it's important to recognize and respect this need for change. Don't expect them to stay content in the same place for long. Instead, support them in their journey of self-discovery. If they want to explore a new hobby, dive into a new creative project, or shift their career direction, be encouraging and open to their process. The more you resist their need for growth and change, the more likely you are to frustrate them. On the other hand, if you can join them in their exploration and support their evolving ideas, you'll find that your relationship with them deepens. For instance, let's say a Gemini friend suddenly decides they want to start a new business. They might talk about it for a few days, dive into researching it, and then, a week later, they're off on a completely new tangent, looking into traveling the world instead. Instead of getting frustrated by their lack of focus, understand that this is how their mind works. They are not indecisive, they're simply exploring different avenues of possibility. If you can embrace their need for change, you'll find yourself experiencing new things right alongside them. The most important thing to remember when dealing with a Gemini is that they are deeply intellectual beings who are always in motion. Their minds are constantly exploring new ideas. Their emotions are shifting like the wind, and their lives are full of changes. But rather than feeling overwhelmed by this, you can learn to thrive in their world by staying open, adaptable, and curious. When talking to a Gemini, don't feel like you need to control the conversation or keep things stable. Instead, embrace the ebb and flow of their thoughts and moods. Let them guide the conversation to unexpected places and follow their lead. Ask questions, explore different topics with them, and don't be afraid to dive into new territory. The more you can match their intellectual energy, the more rewarding the conversation will be. And remember, when a Gemini seems to change their mind or shift their emotions, it's not a sign of inconsistency, it's simply their process of exploring and growing. Give them the space they need, but also challenge them to think deeper, explore more, and embrace the world around them. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Gemini's complex personality, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Zen Mind Peaceful Life. There's so much more to explore about how the stars influence our lives, and I'd love for you to be a part of this journey. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on talking to a Gemini. What's been your experience? I can't wait to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay curious, stay open, and most importantly, stay peaceful.